You know, there's a big dichotomy in Mount Desert Island between year-round people and summer people. The Rockefellers owned, I think, most of the island at some point in time. They're still there. I've met several of them. And then there's the Astors, J.P. Morgan's descendants, and Martha Stewart, who I've seen several times.
This is Audrey Ryan. She grew up on Mount Desert Island in Maine. It's home to Acadia National Park. She says she and her family were year-round people. For a while, her parents lived in a cottage with no heating, just a wood stove. It was built to be a summer house. Her father sold his car to move them into another house. It didn't have indoor plumbing at first. Her father installed it himself.
The house I remember was kind of falling apart, and he was trying to fix it up as he went. Although it was very beautiful. You could we weren't on the ocean, but you could smell it and you could kind of see it through the trees. We were always really close to the ocean, but really I think most of the ocean access in Mount Desert Island is, it's basically for the people that can afford it.
Audrey's father worked as a fisherman. He fished for scallops on a boat called Joshua's Delight.
That kind of fishing, you go out for days sometimes. It's not just a 9 to 5. Sometimes you're gone for a couple days. Sometimes he was gone for a week if they went further away. And they sleep on the boat.
Audrey remembers that once he brought home giant snails he'd caught, and another time a lobster that was too big to sell. In the off-season, her father worked a second job as a carpenter. And then, when Audrey was 19, she learned about her father's third job. She was working as a waitress. Her parents were getting divorced, and she was living with her boyfriend.
I started dating this prep cook, and he was basically a pot dealer. And some customer came in and was trying to buy, I don't know, a dime bag or, some sort of weed from him. And she was telling this story about, oh, well, my regular dealer, he's unavailable right now.
Audrey overheard the customer mention that her dealer was getting a divorce. And then she heard her mention he was arguing with his wife about what to do with their dog. It sounded exactly like a fight her mother and father had just had.
The light bulb went off, and I was like, oh my God, that's my dad.
Audrey says her father never really wanted to talk about dealing drugs. But several years later, he told her about the day he found about 20 pounds of hash in his scallop net. I'm Phoebe Judge. This is Criminal. Audrey Ryan's father, Frank Ryan, told her that for years there were rumors going around that there was hash at the bottom of the ocean. Hash is a concentrated kind of marijuana. It's usually dried to make a kind of resin. One day in 1983, he was out fishing for scallops using a dragnet.
They basically dredge pretty much the ocean floor because scallop beds lay on the ocean floor.
When they brought the net up, they found scallops and something else. There were chunks of something brown and sticky tangled in the net.
My dad said it just smelled really potent and skunky and stinky. Everyone said you could smell it the minute it came on board, so that's how they knew they had it. It didn't smell like your normal seafood. The hash was like bricks. It was literally almost as hard as a brick. And so they said it looked like the sole of a shoe, but thicker. But it was basically a brick of hash, probably, I don't know, maybe 10 inches long and 4 inches wide. But the edges had been rounded off, maybe from the ocean floor or rubbing against things.
They found a few of them. Audrey's father thought they might have about 20 pounds total. He and the crew decided to bring it back and see if they could sell it. But there were narcotics officers waiting on the docks. They were planning to search all the scallop boats coming in that night.
They had a drug-sniffing dog, and my dad's boat came in first. So once they saw the dog and the police coming, my dad freaked out and quickly put the hash in a basically in a scallop bag, and then popped a hole in the bag, and they threw it overboard. It sunk right there.
When police boarded the boat, they opened up any bins they could find. Next, they searched below deck in the crew's quarters.
When the dog came on board and started sniffing, I mean, he smelled something for sure, but they didn't find enough or any evidence to bust them.
The police let them go. Audrey says that after her father told her about that night, she had a lot of questions.
I was like, why are there drugs in the bottom of the ocean? It just seemed like a really bizarre thing to stumble upon.
She started asking her father's friends and other fishermen from the island whether they knew anything. Not everyone wanted to talk to her about it. But about 24 people told her they'd also found hash in the ocean. Sometimes they found the bricks, and sometimes they would find it stuffed in a metal canister.
A canister was worth a lot of money, I don't know, maybe $100,000 or more. So if they got a canister, it was a huge score. But a lot of it was these pieces. And so they would just put it in a bucket on board. A lot of the scallopers had a bucket just for the hash. And then they'd bring it home. They'd clean it up. Sometimes they'd freeze it or dry it. And then they'd smoke it or sell it.
And for the men who were selling it, were they making a lot of money? Where were they selling it?
I think that it didn't have as much value in the island just because there was so much of it. But they get $400 a pound. So if you have, 50 pounds, that's a lot of money. That's $20,000. But I think there was a lot more money to be made out of state. I think once they cleaned it up, if they could get it out of state, they could make a lot of money. So I heard numbers of $300 to $1,000 a pound that the fishermen were getting for it, depending on where they were selling it.
There was so much of it that people in the area knew that if they wanted to buy hash, they should ask a fisherman. Audrey says most of the fishermen didn't get rich. They told her that it was more like a bonus.
There was a lot of rumors about what people had done with the money. I think there were definitely some new trucks, maybe some new boats. But the one that I kept hearing was about this guy who had bought a house with the money in Bar Harbor. And at the time, a house in Bar Harbor wasn't that much money. I think he bought it for like $8,000 of hash money. But now that house is worth probably a couple million, because it's in downtown Bar Harbor. He wouldn't speak with me. He was one of the fishermen who definitely iced me out because I think he knew, what I was going to ask him. But that rumor was confirmed by several people.
And what did the fishermen know about where this had come from?
They just knew that it had come on a boat and drug smugglers had thrown it overboard. That's pretty much what they knew. They knew the name of the boat. A lot of them did. They would say, oh, it came on the Tusker. But I kept saying, how do you spell it? And they'd be like, I don't know, Tusca, Tuska. And I kept Googling, and, this was also not super recently. I started researching this over 10 years ago. So I'm looking for something online, and I couldn't find anything. And I started going to the library and, getting in touch with the local paper. There was nothing. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And then I got in touch with a historian archivist at the Bangor Daily News, and she, boom, sends me back all these articles with the Tusker, and it's ER. It's Tusker.
We'll be right back. To listen without ads, join Criminal Plus. Audrey Ryan learned that the Tusker was a boat owned by something called the Coronado Company. It was started by a man named Lance Weber. He tinkered with cars and liked to smoke pot. He joined the Navy after graduating high school, but once his service was up, he came back home to Coronado, California, just a few miles outside San Diego, and less than 20 miles from the border to Mexico. And one summer, Lance Weber got an idea. He would go to Mexico and buy his own marijuana for cheaper. He'd keep some for himself and sell the rest. And instead of driving back, he would swim. On his first trip, he brought back 25 pounds of marijuana. Then Lance asked some friends to swim with him and bring back more pot.
He was swimming it up the coast a couple miles in trash bags or whatever and selling it to their buddies.
What do you mean swimming it up?
If you look at a map, like it's not that far from the Mexican border up to Coronado. So they literally swim back with the drugs.
So when they were swimming with it, they like attach it to themselves in waterproof, like in a garbage bag?
Pretty much.
Lance and the friends he recruited had gone to the same high school. Some of them had been on the swim team.
They were like a brotherhood. They were friends, and they got into the pot business. It was definitely more of a peace and love hippie kind of thing, and they were good at it, and I think they were smart. And they could have done a lot of different things with their lives, but they decided to get into the pot business, and they thrived.
They made about $5,000, about $45,000 today, on every trip. They would go out at night, in waters where jellyfish and sharks were often seen. The waves were huge. Then they got the idea to use a rubber inflatable boat, like the kind used by the Navy and Marines. They could carry around 100 pounds of marijuana at a time. Lance Weber and the Coronado Company were smuggling marijuana in the 1970s, at a time when both the United States and Mexico began making it harder to bring marijuana across the border. President Nixon had decided to start the war on drugs after learning from a congressional report that half the troops that served in Vietnam used marijuana. He called drugs public enemy number one. The State Department helped the Mexican government fly planes to look for marijuana crops and spray them with herbicide. It didn't stop growers. They would often harvest the plants anyway. The Coronado Company asked their old high school Spanish teacher to translate negotiations with their suppliers in Mexico. His name was Lou Villar. He also used to coach the swim team. They paid him $50 on his first job, then $10,000 on the second job.
And that Spanish teacher ended up being the ringleader of the whole cartel and building it into this pretty massive outfit.
They kept using inflatable boats, and eventually they bought a duck, an amphibious vehicle that the U.S. military used to carry troops on land and water. They started buying marijuana from Thailand. It was supposed to be stronger than what they could get in Mexico, and they could sell it for more money. One time, they used the duck to smuggle in a delivery of marijuana from Thailand that was worth $8 million.
And they weren't just in the San Diego area. They were also in Malibu, and they were basically up and down the coast for years until they got indicted.
In 1973, when the DEA first opened an office in San Diego, agents got a tip that there was a drug smuggling operation in Coronado. Soon, a police officer told them that a former high school teacher was in charge. Then they heard about a boat being sighted off the coast of Coronado in the middle of the night. The DEA agents staked out the beach, but they didn't find anyone. And then, in 1974, the Coronado Company kicked a man named Paul Acree out of the operation. His friends suspected he'd gotten addicted to heroin and cocaine and couldn't be trusted anymore. Paul Acree decided to talk to the DEA. He told them how much marijuana the Coronado Company was bringing in and how they were conducting their operations. Based on Paul Acree's information, the DEA started to build a case against the Coronado Company. In late 1977, a grand jury indicted 26 members of the Coronado Company for conspiracy to commit drug trafficking. But the DEA couldn't arrest them. They didn't know where any of them actually were. The company's lawyer told Lou Villar that he should let some of the indicted turn themselves in, and that higher-ups like Lou should stay on the run. And they stayed in business. A DEA agent later said, quote, "They operated almost like a military unit. They used answering services to leave each other coded messages. They only used payphones. Everyone kept a bag of quarters with them." They were running multiple operations on the West Coast, in San Diego, San Francisco, and Seattle. And when the company heard there was demand on the East Coast, they started a new operation in Maine. In 2015, Audrey got a phone number for someone who had worked for the Coronado Company.
So it took me a few years, but I finally tracked one down, and he told me what had really happened.
Hey, Audrey.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay.
So I just have 10 or 20 questions for you. It might be easier to just fire questions at you.
Yeah.
This is from an interview Audrey recorded with a man named Lee Strimple. When she spoke to him, he was in Texas, working as a ranch manager. Lee told Audrey he started working for the Coronado Company in 1973.
Lee Strimple was the operations manager of a lot of their deals. And when they got on the East Coast, Lee was huge in that role. And he lived in Maine for a year or two.
Lee Strimple told Audrey that the Coronado Company bought a house in a town called Cutler, about 85 miles north of Mount Desert Island.
I had never heard of Cutler before this. It's not much of a town. I mean, there is definitely a harbor of sorts, and there's some fishermen, but I doubt there's 1,000 people that live there. It's remote. One of the reasons they chose it, beside it being remote, is it's kind of in a little cove, like a U-shaped cove, so it has some privacy, but in front of it they call it the Black Ledges, and it's just some rocks sticking out of the ocean, but it's like a landmark. So if you were in a boat, you could find it. It would be enough of a landmark. Because the coast is, the Maine coast is 3,500 miles. So it would be very easy, especially with navigation stuff back then, in the late 70s, to get lost. The thing about the house that's weird, though, is that it's up high. There's the beach and the house. There's maybe 50 feet. And they had to basically build ramps to go from the beach up to the house. That part is a little mysterious to me, why they chose it, because it is a lot of work. But I actually think the Coronado Company liked the challenge of it.
Audrey asked Lee Strimple how the Coronado Company smuggled drugs to Cutler. He told her the first time they did it, they bought a ship and hired a crew to pick them up from Thailand. It took over a month for the ship to make it back to Maine. Once it arrived, Lee and a small crew took a custom-made inflatable raft out to meet the boat in the water. They brought the drugs back to shore. And then they used logging equipment to bring the load up the cliffs to the house in Cutler. Lee Strimple was in charge of the operation. But when he had to be away, he asked a man named Ron Weber to stay there. Here's Lee.
Ron Weber, he and his wife were my lifelong friends, and they were just hired on as caretakers of the house.
The company smuggled drugs into Maine twice in 1977. And then, in 1978, they bought the Tusker for a third operation. They planned to pick up 6 tons of hash from Pakistan and drop it in Cutler that December. But before the boat was supposed to arrive, Ron Weber and his wife told Lee that they were worried about a car they'd seen around.
They kept seeing a Chevy Blazer, like a red Chevy Blazer, and Lee saw that same car at what he called the cop shop, which is the police station.
And that's how we found that we were under surveillance and they were watching the house.
We'll be right back. When Lee Strimple learned about the Chevy Blazer that seemed to be watching them, he tried to warn the crew of the Tusker. They were due back soon from Pakistan with the hash. But no one had had any radio contact with the crew in weeks. Others in the Coronado Company tried to find the boat before it got to Maine. They hired a charter plane to see if they could spot it from the air, but they couldn't find it. On December 12th, just before it was due to arrive, Lee Strimple and Ron Weber decided to go out themselves to meet the Tusker before it got close to the coast. They pushed off from shore about 10 miles south of Cutler. They were trying to make sure they weren't followed. They brought a radio with them. They thought they could warn the crew to stay away. But once they got into the water, they saw something large in the distance. They were too late. The Tusker had already arrived. People in town had seen it, and they were wondering what it was doing there.
Why is there a 137-foot tugboat in the middle of nowhere, when it should be in the Bering Sea, And so they called the cops.
Police had suspected there was a drug smuggling operation in the area. First, they'd gotten a tip about the house in Cutler. A neighbor said he'd noticed a lot of people he didn't recognize. When police checked on who owned the house, they learned the title belonged to a man in Boston. But the address was a P.O. box, and the phone number went to an answering service. The police were part of a task force looking for drug smugglers called Operation Atlantis. They were working with the DEA, Coast Guard, State Police, and IRS. They all shared information with each other. They had created a list of signs of drug smuggling. They asked real estate agents to look for out-of-towners buying land off-season, especially if it was somewhere a bigger boat could dock. Someone building a new pier could also be a sign of smuggling. People buying a portable conveyor belt was another sign. That night, around 9 p.m., someone called the Coast Guard to tell them about the Tusker. When Coast Guard officers boarded the boat and performed a search, they believed they were looking for marijuana.
They were looking, they knew what marijuana bales look like, which look a lot different than metal canisters of hash. So they searched the boat and they didn't find anything because they didn't know what they were looking for. But anyway, the Coast Guard looked around and they said, well, there's no drugs. We don't see anything. So they actually wrote them up for the only thing they could to keep them, which is that they had no lights at night because it was like 10 o'clock at night. So they said, no, we're going to bring you in for that. The Coast Guard towed them in to the station. And while they did that, they weren't able to see a whole side of the Tusker. And it was a big boat. And in that, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, the crew threw 300 canisters of hash overboard, and it plummeted to the ocean floor.
And where was Lee Strimple in all of this?
He was freaked out. He was on a Zodiac, which is those little inflatable boats, basically with an outboard motor. So they booked it. And they took the Zodiac back towards the Cutler house, but then they heard all the authorities there that were like, there they are, we got them. So once they realized that they were going to get busted, they made a run for it.
Lee Strimple and Ron Weber went east until they found a cove. They beached the boat, and then they started running up the beach into the woods.
And Lee is a smart guy. He's also really athletic and strong. And I think if he had been in his own, I actually think that he probably would have made it. I think he probably would have been able to get far enough away and pretend to be a civilian that he might have managed to not get busted, but he was with this other guy. And the other guy was a smoker. And he had night blindness. So as soon as they were in the woods trying to make a run for it, this partner of his was basically like, I can't do this. It's also freezing cold. It's December. It was really chilly. And so his partner basically quit on him and said, I can't do this until there's daylight. And I think Lee was completely, shattered because I think he knew that the end was coming. The guy he was with, Ron Weber, knew all their secrets. So, and it was an old friend of his. They'd known each other for 15 years, so he didn't want to just ditch his friend in the cold woods. So he stayed there with him and then the cops busted them at 3 a.m. They found him in the woods.
DEA agents brought Lee Strimple and Ron Weber to a local jail, where the crew of the Tusker was also being held.
And he overheard the captain saying, I don't know why they brought us in here. So he actually knew that comment was directed to him and that basically they had scuttled the evidence.
Here's Lee.
He was talking to me at the other end of the building, and I'm going, what? The boys had managed to chuck that stuff all off the boat.
And so he had a moment of relief of like, well, they have us here in jail, but they really don't have any evidence against us.
But then, canisters started washing up on shore. Over the next week, divers brought up over 600 pounds of the hash. There were still hundreds of pounds of hash at the bottom of the ocean that the police hadn't found. Lee said that at one point he thought the Coronado Company might be able to find the drugs and sell them, but eventually he realized that wouldn't be possible.
But he claims, and he could just be humoring me, but he claims that he thought of the scallop fishermen and that he actually thought, well, the locals will have a heyday with this. We just dropped $60 million worth of drugs on the ocean floor.
So all of that hash that had been dropped in Cutler, which is kind of a distance from where your father was. I mean, it was just kind of swept with tides along the bottom, or were people fishing up there and then they bring it back into the harbor?
I had the same question. It turns out scallop fishermen travel far distances. Like they go to the scallop beds. And this is also like a huge coincidence because those drugs could have been dropped anywhere, but they happened to be dropped on what my dad described as the best scallop beds he'd ever seen. So that was not just a heyday because they were making money off of hash. It was also a heyday because they were, dragging up like 1,000 pounds of scallops a day. And at the time, scallops were worth $7 a pound. So they were making $7,000 in a day. This is in like early 80s off of scallops, and also have a cash bonus of a bunch of hash. So it was just a pure coincidence and a total bonanza for the fishing community. And my dad said that, the second year that he started finding it in his nets, there were like 80 boats all of a sudden.
Ron Weber was sentenced to 2 years in prison for drug smuggling. Lee Strimple was convicted of conspiracy to import $1.5 million worth of hash into Maine. He served 2 years in prison and 5 years on probation. Where is Lee now?
So Lee's moved around a bit. Lee, because he's a felon, he hasn't really been able to get ahead much. When I met him, he was living in Texas, in Harper, Texas, and he was a manager of a ranch. And, he's really good at that kind of thing because he has all this operational experience.
Lee told Audrey that now that marijuana is legal, he's thought about applying for a pardon. By 1984, 6 years after the Tusker dumped its cargo, 57 people associated with the Coronado Company had been convicted in Maine, California, and Washington state. 27 people were also indicted by the federal government for drug trafficking. Lou Villar, the man in charge of the Coronado Company, made a deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office. In exchange for information about who was in the company and who they worked with, Lou received a sentence of time served and was released. As part of his deal, he also had to go on the radio to warn people against getting into drugs. For years after the Tusker, people went looking for the hash. They would use dragnets or go diving for it. One police chief said, "That place is busier than the mall at Christmas time." Criminal is created by Lauren Spohr and me. Nadia Wilson is our senior producer. Katie Bishop is our supervising producer. Our producers are Susanna Robertson, Jackie Sajiko, Lily Clark, Lena Sillison, and Megan Kinane. Our show is mixed and engineered by Veronica Simonetti. Julian Alexander makes original illustrations for each episode of Criminal. You can see them at thisiscriminal.com. And you can sign up for our newsletter at thisiscriminal.com/newsletter. We hope you'll consider supporting our work by joining our membership program, Criminal Plus. You can listen to Criminal, This Is Love, and Phoebe Reads a Mystery without any ads. Plus, you'll get bonus episodes. These are special episodes with me and Criminal co-creator Lauren Spohr, talking about everything from how we make our episodes, to the crime stories that caught our attention that week, to things we've been enjoying lately. To learn more, go to thisiscriminal.com/plus. We're on Facebook at This Is Criminal, and Instagram and TikTok at criminal_podcast. We're also on YouTube at youtube.com/criminalpodcast. Criminal is part of the Vox Media Podcast Network. Discover more great shows at podcast.voxmedia.com. I'm Phoebe Judge. This is Criminal.